Hey, what's up you guys, it's Ruthie and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to go into part 4 of chapter 8 of the Mothers and Daughters of the Bible Speak by Shannon Bream. So let's get right into this video. This video may contain sensitive topics. Nope, just kidding. This video is going to contain topics of the Bible. If you do not wish to continue, I suggest you click off the video now. You have been warned. In this passage we see fasting is not just an aspect of supplicatory prayer but of worship itself. Jesus himself commanded fasting, Matthew 17:21, and assumed that it was not a question of his followers would fast when Matthew 6:16. Fasting continued to be a part of the Christian tradition for hundreds of years, consecrated most famously not only in times before festivals of Christmas and Advent and Easter and Lent, but also on other occasions throughout the year. When performed as a community, fasting is and was especially powerful spiritual tool, which Esther used to her advantage. Abstaining from food is not in itself a holy activity. Plenty of people go without food for reasons of vanity, health, or poverty. It is only when fasting is dedicated to God in an intentional and meaningful way, and when the time that would have been spent on eating is spent instead in prayer, that fasting becomes powerful. Notice when Esther said, "I and my attendants will fast as you do," Esther 4:16. Fasting was not something she'd asked the community to do on her behalf, but to do along with her. Finally, note Mordecai's reaction to Esther's newfound courage and spiritual wisdom. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions, Esther 4:17. At the beginning of the story, Esther obeyed Mordecai faithfully, following all of his commands. But near the end of the story, their positions are reversed. Mordecai is the one following Esther's instructions. At their best, fathers still instill confidence in their daughters, yet obedience is key before we're old enough to reason through difficult decisions for ourselves. Ultimately, though, the goal is to raise young women to know the truth and recognize when God has placed them in a position to act, and to teach them to call on the courage they'll need in a moment. Esther had the wisdom and bravery to meet her challenge when it arrived. The happy ending. For Esther, everything hung in the balance. She had pledged to break the rules and go to the king once the period of fasting was completed, and now it was go time. She donned her royal robes and headed to the king's court. Esther was resigned in her fate, convinced she was meeting her destiny head on when she approached the king. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out her to the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Esther 5:2. Here begins the happy ending of Esther's perilous journey. Not only was Xerxes glad to see Esther, but he also told her to ask for anything, up to half the kingdom. It will be given to you. Esther 5:3. Esther's predecessor, Queen Vashti, was banished by the king because of her lack of obedience to his commands. Esther presumably was the chosen replacement, at least in part because she was not only beautiful but also young and pliable. Mordecai had taught her the value of obedience growing up, making her well suited to be the king's companion. But her whole story hinged on the moment when Esther had to be disobedient. She had to break the laws of the king's court. Part of understanding and embracing true obedience is knowing when to disobey one edict in order to comply with a different, higher call. Esther disobeyed spectacularly, and it paid off. The king was pleased to admit her, and throughout the story, the unspoken truth seems to be that the king is quite taken with her. And Esther's life was spared. Given the chance, she didn't ask for even a fraction of the kingdom. This wasn't about her, it was about her people. She invited the king to a banquet along with Haman. Xerxes immediately accepted the invitation. And when he showed up, the king again asked Esther what he could do for her. Notice how the king was eager to obey Esther now. She must have had an air of command about her. The king's crush on his bride peeks through too in his desire to grant nearly anything she could wish. She invited them both back to a banquet the next day. Was she nervous, stalling for time? The Bible doesn't tell us, but it's clear she had lulled Haman into a deep sense of security. He left the first feast happy and in high spirits, but that they quickly soured when he saw Mordecai refusing to acknowledge him or show any fear in his presence. Esther 5:9. We're told he burned with rage. He soothed himself by calling together his friends in order to brag about his wealth, his position, and the 2 invites he'd scored from the queen. When Haman unloaded his disgust for Mordecai, his wife and his friends advised him to build a giant gallows and hang the Jewish man in the morning. If you studied Esther's story, then you know the amazing twist that comes next. While Haman was dreaming of his distardedly planned, King Xerxes couldn't sleep at all. He asked the old record books be brought to him and read. It reminded him of Mordecai's role exposing an assassination attempt on the king. Xerxes asked how Mordecai had been honored and found that nothing had been done. Note also that Mordecai had never demanded a reward or recognition. He had neither lodged a complaint with the palace guard nor fired off an angry letter. No Persian customer service. Had their positions have been reversed, you better believe Haman would have handled it differently, and we've got proof. As the king began to think about how to adequately thank the man who'd saved his life, Haman had entered the palace courts. He was headed to the king to ask for permission to kill the man the king wanted to honor, Mordecai. When Xerxes asked Haman for ideas about celebrating someone special, Haman, of course, assumed that he was the VIP about to take the spotlight, so of course he proposed an elaborate, very public display of appreciation. That meant Haman spent his day making sure Mordecai was decked out in royal robe on one of the king's horses as Haman led him through the streets, telling people, "This is what is done for the man of the king delights to honor." Esther 6:10. You know, instead of killing him, every time I read this passage, I'm gobsmacked. Haman had spent so much of his time being outraged that Mordecai wouldn't give him the respect he demanded. There are few reversals in the Bible more poetic than this one, and we're not even close to being done. Haman had just enough time to go home and complain to his wife again before it was time to return to the second banquet with Queen Esther. Here's where it really gets good. The king once again asked what he could do to make Esther happy. She responded by asking him to spare her life and the lives of her people. Imagine how confused Xerxes must have been at first. He asked who could have devised such a scheme, and this was Esther's moment. She pointed right at Haman and called him out on the spot. The king was so angry he walked into the palace garden. While Xerxes was gone, Haman began to beg Esther for his life, and he was literally falling onto the couch where she was seated as the king walked back into the room. The king exclaimed, Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" Esther 7:8. You guessed it. Things were about to go from bad to worse for Haman. At that very moment, one of the king's servants piped up. "It just so happens there's this giant gallows at Haman's house that he made for Mordecai, you know, the guy who saved your life." The king's direction was swift. Use it for Haman. Y'all, I have to believe there were very real concrete moments of extreme fear for Esther all through this journey, yet she had relied on the counsel of Mordecai, honoring him as an obedient daughter and brave truth-teller when it mattered most. No blockbuster movie would be complete without an epic reveal, and Esther had one. The same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther 8:1-2. I'm going to leave it off right there, and I will see you guys in the next part of this chapter. Bye!